So, a long time ago I did the rankings of the first 3 Doctors and their stories. The good, the bad, and whatever this is. But now, after your frustration of waiting for a notification, I will rank the entire 4th Doctor era, all 42 stories, yes, including Shada, from worst to best. 1960s might be my favourite era of the show, but Tom Baker, that was my childhood, pure gold. And I wouldn't be a Doctor Who fan without him. Let's finally do this and rank the 4th Doctor era from the very worst to the best 4th Doctor story. Number 42. Didn't I say we're starting with the stinkers? Because oh boy, that's an understatement. It deserves to be in the fiery depths of the Underworld because only the worst demons imaginable could conjure something so notoriously shit that is Underworld. Unfortunately, the first 4 stories within this ranking I consider absolutely freaking dreadful, or F tier. So we've got some work to do before we get out of the uglies, I'm afraid. But Underworld's ambition and over-reliance on green screen technology was one of its many undoings. It makes the mutants' attempt at it look watchable. I also dare you to take a shot every time you hear mentioned the phrase, "The quest is the quest." From this guy alone, you'll be put in the hospital. So the plot of Underworld. The TARDIS lands on a Minion ship craft commanded by Jackson and his crew. They are on a quest to recover the genetic banks from the ships to recover the race, while the ship's computer system, which has been on the planet for centuries, named Oracle, was programmed to protect the banks that slowly corrupted and went insane. And I don't really blame it, and I'm seriously questioning my own sanity of why I would even watch Underworld in the first place. It doesn't help. The crew are some of the most unlikable bunch of characters ever. And I'm not sure what would put you in a coma first. The terrible effects or the mundane acting from the supporting characters. All that the Doctor and Leela do in the story is freaking walk everywhere. They might as well walk an entire continent. Jackson, the so-called leader, is like a washed out, lifeless old sponge. Horik overreacts so much he seriously needs some meditation and yoga in his life, just needs to chill. And Normas is just a weird guy really, but I am too, so I don't have too much against him. And the worst part is, we haven't even explained the CSO effects. It looks like the characters are floating and walking on air. Generic black masked villains who aren't intimidating in the slightest, which realistically they should be, considering Underworld has aspects of slavery and oppression. This back and forward rescuing people who end up just running about themselves, then being left and almost forgotten about, is just a right mess of a story. Like I said, with a story that has themes and aspects of slavery, and this is going to be the worst thing I'm going to say about Underworld, mind you, I felt nothing for the slaves, which sounds horrible. The characters and slaves I felt nothing for because the writing and performances were that dreadful. It's difficult to convey what the story wanted to achieve for the viewer when everything about the story was a colossal failure. Dudley Simpson was legit the one thing that saved the story from being a 0 out of 10 because the music is great.
If I was being generous, and I mean really freaking generous, episode 1 is barely okay. But the longer the story goes on, the more you hate your own existence because you cannot logically comprehend that you're wasting an hour and a half watching Underworld.
Everything else is pain and suffering. I think if I was forced to watch Underworld over and over again for 24 hours, I believe that would constitute mental torture. Completely avoid Underworld if you value yourself. Number 41. The Leisure Hive is so painfully terrible even K9 wanted to delete himself. Me hating on the Leisure Hive is pretty much a meme on this channel, everyone knows I don't like it. But you will find people out there who will defend it and call it underrated. I am not one of those people.
And in particular, let me introduce you to the most pretentious, self-centered, egotistical asshole in Doctor Who history. This freaking guy.
I swear this guy would marry himself, he's that much of a loser. Honestly gives me Zamasu vibes from Dragon Ball Super, and I would be pretty pissed too if I looked like an expired avocado. I can literally smell this guy looking at him on the screen. The plot is focused on the planet Argolis, with a surface completely void of life due to a war between the Argolins and the cute fuzzy looking Famasi. The Argolins are a dying race with no way of reproduction, and Mina, who is in command, is slowly dying. The criminal organisation of the Famasi, which yes, these cute things are in fact criminals, I mean appearances can be deceiving, they attempt to gaslight the Argolins to sell the dead planet by calling it a wasteland, while the big egomaniac Pangol is actively seeking a war with the Famasi. Yeah, like that went brilliant for you the first time, but this time he's bringing his race back by cloning himself. Didn't I say this dude would marry himself? Of course he would do that. Look at his smug ass face. Egomaniac to the extreme. Now maybe that's a good thing about the Leisure Hive, that this villain is such a egotistical megalomaniac. The story wants you to hate him, but personally I don't think that's what they wanted to do. But it looks like I'm the only one with a problem with this character, because I look at reviews on the Leisure Hive, I don't see anyone sharing my disdain for this particular character, so it's probably just me. I just despise him. If I am to attempt to say something nice about the Leisure Hive, I would say part 1 is fine. Pretty creative cliffhangers, excellent incidental music by Peter Howell, and that's it. I know some people like the story, I'm clearly not one of those people. I dislike it on every viewing. I would gladly watch the Monster of Peladon over it, which is my least favourite Pertwee story. Man, I might even say the same thing about the Space Pirates and the Smugglers. Yeah, I really went there. Tom and Lala don't look like they really cared about this story, especially Tom. I dislike this story, and it's doubtful I will ever watch it again. If I decide to do another Doctor Who marathon, that is. Slap that shit into F tier. Number 40.
My dreams of conquest! You have brought this calamity upon me!
It took me 4 attempts to get through this story, and it's really only known because of its memes. The screenshot alone basically sums it up. The Horns of Nimon's existence is mainly being memed to death, while having the reputation of a rubbish story with no redeeming qualities. Sometimes I can't tell if the story is trying to be serious or downright funny. Very poor performances from the background characters. The Nimon are hilariously bad. Your neck's looking a bit wonky there, mate. Looks like the worst case of a bad neck cramp forming. But the thing that hurts here is I actually like the concept of the Horns of Nimon about a people after a bygone age to regain past power that has long disappeared, while the Nimon act as this old and extinct ancient myth who are manipulating the people and lying about their actual numbers. The Nimon are deceiving their servants to bring forward the great journey of life, and the idea of an intergalactic parasite feeding on civilizations that were already decaying in the first place and taking advantage of its conquest, and a good depiction of how colonialism works. That being said, the Horns of Nimon is everything I dislike about a story because it isn't fun or enjoyable whatsoever. It's an empty soulless story that failed to deliver on concepts that could have been something special. Now its legacy, if you can even call it that, is a story known solely on its memes. Number 39. If someone tells you Creature from the Pit is their favourite story from Doctor Who, they're saying it for one reason. And for some reason, it seems to be the only thing I remember about it. The infamous Creature from the Pit. Okay, Creature from the Pit suffers the same problem as the Horns of Nimon. It's so painfully dull. No, I don't think it's Underworld levels of terrible. And some of his performances are good, such as Lady Astra, but it does not save it. The plot surrounding Lady Astra isn't at all captivating, but she does come across as very brutish, even slaps Romana into another dimension.
There are some questions. Ow!
That might be the best slap in all of Classic Who, which Classic Who doesn't seem to do very well. Oh dear, at least he tried, bless him. The story attempts to go for this alien but medieval approach, but it doesn't really land. The guards are even more dumb than stormtroopers, but without the flair of actual stormtroopers, and the monster is one of the most pathetic attempts of a monster in Doctor Who's history. It looks like an overflated whoopee cushion. The bandits were utterly useless, and the less I talk about them, the better. Creature from the Pit belongs in the pit, and we will never speak of this again.
So we have finally escaped the F-tier Doctor Who stories, the worst of the worst. We're still not kind of out of the woods yet. The next stories are, I would say, bearable. Wouldn't say terrible stories, just okay. Not the best of the Tom Baker era, but if you are new to the 4th Doctor era, do not bother with Underworld. It belongs in the bottom of hell itself. The Leisure Hive is probably the most controversial pick in my opinion, because I do see some people do like the Leisure Hive, so that one I would say is probably the most controversial pick. Horns of Nimon was, it could have been something brilliant personally, wasn't executed well, and Creature from the Pit, well, let's just keep it in the pit for everyone's sake. So let's move on to some better Doctor Who stories.
Number 38. The Doctor Who story to introduce, in my opinion, the most underrated companion in the show, Leela. The face of evil. And even though it's in the golden age of Doctor Who, in my opinion, one of my least favourite Doctor Who stories of all time, and that might come to a shock to you, I don't know. The Doctor lands on a planet with its occupants being the 17 tribe, who worship a god known as Xoanin, which is a supercomputer that was drove mad due to multiplied downloaded personalities into a single system. Conceptually, it's an interesting take for a malicious AI system, much more interesting than Underworld, where the Doctor attempts to rewrite a past wrong that leaves the viewer guessing. The Face of Evil has an interesting idea on how the Doctor's actions have perhaps affected the lives of others, what happens after the Doctor leaves, is it for better, is it for worse, but the story, however, is very slow, and relies heavily on exposition and on the 17, who I wasn't really invested in to begin with. But some of its cliffhangers, I will give credit, were pretty good, with a subtle, haunting feeling to them. But after part 2, The Face of Evil to me feels aimless and then changes into something completely different in the second half, with these characters who are completely forgettable, and the story just ends up more tedious than the first half. The main problem for me is the story fails to hold interest. Love Leela, wonderful performances in the story, but that's all she wrote home. Number 37. I'll let him introduce himself.
Then who are you?
I am Meglos!
Meglos is a weird one for me. I enjoyed it, I think, while at the same time it is littered, and I mean a mountain of trash littered with flaws, especially with shoddy directing, acting and performances. To describe Meglos as in a villain, there's nothing worse than a cranky cactus on a power trip. Is it bad? Yes, it is in places. It's one of the few doppelganger Doctor Who stories. I do feel for Tom Baker in this one because in back-to-back stories he was required to wear quite horrible prosthetic makeup, and you can see it was a struggle for him. So while I give Jacqueline Hill her credit, she played a rather good character with Lexa, a figurehead and leader of a highly religious and fanatical society, but the background characters, they was just vibe killers for me. They were like held hostage in the story. Did the production team literally have guns trailed on them because they looked like they didn't even want to be there? I believe Meglos was Terence Dudley's only directorial involvement in the show, and I'm not surprised because some of the scenes looked so lifeless and sometimes stupid. It's average at best. Number 36. So we went to this, to this. It's the Nightmare of Eden. The Nightmare of Eden is set on a space liner ship where two spaceships have become locked together after emerging from hyperspace. A bunch of mandrels running about, drug smuggling, murders and carnage. Now, I don't personally hate this story, I don't even dislike it, it's just one of the most tackiest stories of all time. Okay, let's cover the good before the roasting sessions.
Now, I have weird respect for the Nightmare of Eden because they clearly are taking the piss, the BBC taking the piss out of the Nightmare of Eden just by the cover art itself. You can see on the cover the people's faces while wearing the mandrel costume, so I got respect to it. You sometimes gotta laugh at your own work. I can look back at my old content and go, yeah, that was a bit of a piece of shit content, but hey, it shows growth, and I do respect it.
I like the whodunit plotline, which at least holds my attention. That's better than Horns of Nimon and Creature from the Pit, am I right? Some small plot points merge into one and connecting everything together, like the missing crew members, the drug smuggling, and travelling to Eden where the mandrels live. Now the bad. We've already mentioned it, it's tacky beyond belief. But the thing is, some of the best episodes in Classic Who are tacky in places, but the reason why Nightmare of Eden doesn't hold any status is the mandrels themselves. They have nothing going for them. Zero lore, zero backstory, not convincing monsters. Yet Nightmare of Eden is a poor story, entertaining characters I gotta admit, which keeps it up there for me at least from just being a 5 out of 10. But it has a can't be asked feeling to the story, a story connected together by simply duct tape. Number 35. It goes back to Space Station Nerva, the same setting as the Ark in Space. But what makes Ark in Space stand out far more than Revenge of the Cybermen is making the set design creepy and atmospheric. And that's sad because atmosphere in Cybermen is like a match made in heaven. And I don't even like Return of the Cybermen's version either, the original draft of this story. It goes to show I might have early memories of this story, same time period as horror fan rock. It doesn't prevent it from being rather average. Some scenes it does capture horror, like the piles of dead bodies, but it just quickly fades away. I wish it continued that foreboding edge, it just works wonders with the Cybermen. The Ark in Space focuses more on Nerva, while Revenge is more on Voga, or the Planet of Gold, which holds the Cybermen's greatest weakness, which plays a pivotal moment in the Cyber War. You also have the appearance and depiction of the Cyber Mats. I'm sorry they're bad in the 60s, not convincing. Here, I think it's the best depiction. And we have Kelman, who acts as a double agent for the Vogan race, who are enemies of the Cybermen, who are utilising a missile to wipe out the entire Cybermen fleet. For some reason I get William Hartnell vibes from this story, especially with the Vogans, two groups who are in conflict with each other, who can be distinguished by ones having bald heads, and others looking like warrior grandmas. Anyway, the build-up after the long hiatus of the Cybermen was, poor. Goes to show my favourite villain doesn't always win, an uncommon weak link in the golden age of Doctor Who. Number 34. Destiny of the Daleks is a bit crap. An easy watch, fun in places, sure, but crap. Nothing I hate about it, it's just, again, like Nightmare of Eden, very cheap. Doesn't really have any passion behind the story. We know what a Dalek and Davros story with passion looks like. We all know it. It looks like the cast members just want to get their money and just piss off down to the pub. They just look like they are held hostage on set, and this seems to be a problem in many stories that I noticed in season 17 and 18. And while I have appreciation, we all do, for Terry Nation and what he's done for the show, it's fine to acknowledge that Destiny of the Daleks is a poor effort where passion wasn't the driving factor behind it. The scenes with Davros too are pretty lackluster. And the scene of the Doctor moving Davros around in episode 3 is more funny than anything else. So Davros is in a coma for centuries, only to be used like a bumper car. He must seriously be regretting his revival. David Goodison never really captured the insane megalomaniac that he was in Genesis. Terry Malloy brought that back with his own style, but Goodison sadly never had the flair, and the mask didn't fit him at all. Following Genesis, Davros was in every Dalek story, and with the addition of the Movellans, conceptually they were good, being attractive in appearance, but they ended up being machines with no morals but programming. In truth, Destiny of the Daleks, it just isn't a good Dalek story. Rather silly in some places, you can't really take the Daleks seriously, which has been a trend in a few Doctor Who Dalek stories like The Chase, but here I just really don't like them. I did enjoy parts of it, but making the Daleks serious and Davros to return, it didn't make the mark. Number 33. I've only watched this story once prior to the marathon. Didn't remember anything about it, but it's the introduction of K9, the Invisible Enemy, a heavily science-based story written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, who aren't particularly favourites of mine. I find their stories kind of average, but I don't mind the Invisible Enemy. The story starts with a distress signal to one of Saturn's moons, and Leela senses a sinister evil which is the nucleus, which is this thing. A fun fact about the nucleus, it actually infects the TARDIS after the events of the Invisible Enemy and is inside the TARDIS and stays in there for years. So does that mean Sutekh and the nucleus were talking shit to each other throughout the entire era? Yeah, probably. The nucleus I quite like as a space virus, which the Doctor gets infected by. If you like stuff like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or quite whimsical science space romps, you might get something out of it. The set design, characters and the plot definitely invokes that feeling. The swarm as a concept are pretty creepy, as the Doctor was instantly infected through the TARDIS console when making contact. Despite the supporting characters, I have to admit, are pretty dull. I like its concepts and the story. It's fun, rather silly, don't take it too seriously, and you have to be in the right frame of mind to appreciate this story, I think. Is it the best? No, not at all. Is it bad? No. It's pretty strange, but I appreciate it for what it is. But episode 2 does feel like it goes on for far too long. It becomes like next Christmas until you complete the story. You already know the plot from that point on, and nothing new gets established. You can live without it. If you've never planned to sit down and watch The Invisible Enemy, you won't be missing really anything. The second half is basically a foreshadowing of Underworld, uses the same green screen animation effects, but here it's okay. I'm also not sure why this is rated above PG, it's rather a silly story, but yeah, I don't know why the Mind of Evil's a U. Yeah, it deserves at least one viewing, but you won't be missing much. Number 32. A rather odd return to Gallifrey, and yeah, underwhelming, especially when you compare it to The Deadly Assassin. One story was full of suspense, mystery, and the depictions of Time Lord society was god tier amazing. Here, it's an odd story, and that's me being rather nice and generous. It does have some twists and turns in its directions, like starting out with the Varden, and then boom, Potato Head Sontarans show up. This is the Invasion of Time. The story is looked down by the majority of Doctor Who fans for being slow, a little one-dimensional compared to The Deadly Assassin as I've stated, and a hot mess, which is a good analogy for the Invasion of Time. It's like put in a blender and the writing team said, yep, that's good. Even though the Vardens look like sheets of tinfoil paper, good old classic Doctor Who, the Vardens conceptually, yeah, they are interesting. Appearances and voicing is atrocious. You have Chancellor Barossa, who plays a recurring character and a notable role in the Five Doctors, pretty much top performances with the Doctor's aggression to Barossa. I mean, the Fourth Doctor doesn't take no shit in this story, especially the Barossa.
Get out!
So a lot of what happened in The Deadly Assassin is in fact referenced here. But not only were the Vardens' voices pretty crap, the Sontarans as well were, well, crap. They sound congested.
This is the only way out.
Don't worry, I've got some nasal spray for you. So the Sontarans, despite being built up as this shock trooper team, the elite of the elite in the Sontaran Corps, aren't so elite because their biggest weakness is apparently not the probic vent, but a fucking deck chair.
The Sontarans are the finest soldiers in the galaxy.
What's going on, Captain?
Nothing much.
The Sontarans are the finest soldiers in the galaxy.
Also, I love this one. Look at him just being a badass, jumping over the corner of the pool. God, don't mess with him, lads.
Also, what is this? I always found this amusing. So not only are the Sontarans the finest soldiers in the galaxy, but the Time Lords, the most technological masters of the universe, somehow have seats from a ball pit or something.
Yeah, I don't know why they left that in. I presume they said, stuff it, it's good enough. Yeah, not as bad as some say. I honestly quite enjoy it in some places, but Leela's exit was really poor. She deserved better. Yeah, it's okay. Number 31. The Power of Kroll. Well, at least it looks better than a giant whoopee cushion. I'm actually joking. Kroll does look pretty impressive in this story, and my problem with the Power of Kroll has nothing to do with Kroll. The TARDIS lands on Delta Magna, set on a methane refinery. We also have the natives called the Swampies, who sacrifice people to their god Kroll. Bonus points if you know what film this is referencing. It really doesn't help this follows The Androids of Tara, which is by far the better story, and it's awkwardly placed as the penultimate key to time story. A rather, predictable story of a giant monster. It's creature from the pit, but just better. You might be surprised to hear this, and I completely forgot this is a fact about the story. It's written by Robert Holmes, a man so legendary for delivering such classics to our television. It seems that even the best can produce farters. No pun intended. Space pirates. You also have the famous Doctor Who actor who appeared in many classic stories, Philip Murdoch. Story-wise, I don't have a lot of praise for it. It's a story of an evil corporation exploring the local environment at the expense of the local population, the natives. Has themes of imperialism and corporatism, which classic Doctor Who does incorporate pretty well. But the thing is, it's done way better in other stories. However, one scene which is really impressive is when Kroll is attacking the refinery. I will be honest, it looks pretty impressive for the time. And I think Kroll looks even better than the dinosaurs in Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And in fact, I don't even dislike that story either. Power of Kroll is just there, and that's about it. Another thing I quite like about the Power of Kroll is the lack of characters who are actually friend. The refinery crew are hostile, the Swampies are hostile. It adds a lot of tension where it feels like the Doctor and Romana are pretty much alone, trying to recover the segment of the Key to Time. Yeah, it's a pretty good story, but nothing special. Number 30. "100% a filler episode in the season, but have quite the soft spot for. With the two-part formula being quite a rare oddity in Classic Who, the Sontaran Experiment offers a wonderful yet underrated story with the return of the Sontarans, following the Time Warrior. Yes, it is no Time Warrior, but I would gladly watch it over the Invasion of Time. We've bullied the Sontarans enough in that story. This story serves as a great example of how Doctor Who can create a story from a blank canvas and solely on location shooting in the moors of England. It's an easy to follow plot of a Sontaran named Steyr on a reconnaissance research mission for the Sontaran Empire and is experimenting on humans, with quite dark methods and scenes of torture, while the Sontaran Steyr is completely emotionless and is only concerned about its own objectives to find the weaknesses in human beings to be successful in their invasion of the Earth and to fight against humanity. Bob Baker and Dave Martin even foreshadow Genesis of the Daleks in this story, which I like, with Sarah referencing that the landscape is rather empty and it could have mutations and creatures roaming about, which of course is referenced in Skaro. The Sontaran Steyr also has a drone robot which surveys the land to capture people, Vero, Eric and Roth being survivors, and a Galsec military force and the crew. Yeah, they're passable. We understand the Earth has been dumped, but these characters don't believe in the story of Nerva being a lost colony and call it a myth. Part 2 is better than Part 1, it gets things moving. The scenes of the experiments by the Sontaran, as I said, very grueling, and with the Doctor manipulating the Sontaran's pride to fight him in single combat was a cool scene. The characters' motivations of the crew was a rushed aspect of the story in my opinion, but you only had 2 parts. But overall, a fun story. Number 29.
Oh look! Rocks!
This might be the biggest surprise on the list, considering how low it is. I might be crucified in the comments, but we'll see. I consider it one of the most overrated Doctor Who stories ever, which will probably come to a surprise considering it's got gothic horror elements in it. Every time I give this a watch, my opinion doesn't change. It's set in present day Cornwall. It is the Stones of Blood, story free from the Key to Time era. A story full of gothic horror elements. Sounds like my bread and butter. How can I possibly dislike it, right? Well, this is how it always went for me. It goes like this. I love the first half. I heavily dislike the second half. I remember pretty clear that the second half was one of my least favourite parts of not just out of the story, but the 4th Doctor era. I heavily dislike the second half. Does it hold true after finally returning to it after about 5 or 6 years? Yeah, my opinion is still the same. Despite of what I just said, I love the introduction with these cultists under the dark full moon, surrounded by stones with blood on them, performing these rituals. I love the gothic horror tones. Love it. Bread and butter. Some of the best depictions of gothic horror one could ask for in Doctor Who. The stones have extremely foreboding, pulsating heart sounds when the cultists cover the stones in blood. The creepy fog, which worked brilliantly when recorded on location. The crow symbolising evil, as well with the Dr. Romana also get a haunting voice warning of danger, which makes it even better. And also the build up to the Black Guardian, which is perfect for this story, and how the key to time in the wrong hands can create the worst form of evil. It seems like the locals who talk about the British Institute of Juric Studies seem rather normal about them doing these sacrifices around the 9 Traveller's Stones. Honestly, I can't see how you can dislike the opening episodes. The direction, the setup is simply awesome. But I've always had the opinion on the first half. That's always been a fact for me, that the first half is flipping fantastic. Mr. DeVires, who says the stones are secret, is an amazing character from a cult leader and then acting like a normal man. But when he acts like a normal man, but there's something that still feels off about him. Yeah, the cliffhangers were a bit odd. Could have been executed a bit better, but I still love episode 1 and 2. Despite it being so long since I last watched the story, I completely forgot about the twist reveal in the halfway point. And yeah, you could see it coming, and I'm not mad at it. But then it quickly turns from a story with gothic horror elements to just being flipping cheesy and silly. My relationship with the story is odd. A lot of concepts and ideas and the gothic horror elements I love, and works well as a self-contained story. So is the location shooting, with a pretty small selection of characters, but that comes to its benefit. But for some reason I struggle to get down with it in the second half of it. I feel the gothic horror elements gets completely killed off, and if that wasn't the case, this could be up with the Daemons for me perhaps, if it never killed it in the second half. Episode 3 is very talky, and not a lot happens, and episode 4 in my opinion is the worst episode. If I had to rate single episodes within the Stones of Blood, episode 1 is a 9, episode 2 is an 8, episode 3 is a 6, and episode 4 is a 4. So it gets worse as it goes on. Not really a fan, and I consider this story overrated. Number 28. What could I tell you about this one? For the conclusion of the Key to Time, it somehow manages to be one of the few stories I remember next to nothing about in terms of its plot. Yes, we know it features the Black Guardian and using the Key to Time to invoke his twisted version of order to shape the universe in his image. But a self-contained plot? Meh. It's got its fans who will swear by it, but it's considered more of a messy slog than anything else. But as a concept it is pretty cool, of a big scale science fiction war setting and a big central computer system leading the war. It sounds cool for a 6-part story, only results in being rather dragged out. The reason it doesn't sit well with most because the Armageddon Factor is too ambitious for its own good, and I feel it would work better as a novel, which the World-Mounted War is pretty much homage to it after all. It suffers from the Web Planet effect of ambition being too much. Besides the snore fest of a plot, most of its other elements are honestly quite good, like some of the supporting characters like the Marshal, the costume and set design is all flipping fantastic. Lala Ward playing Astra, splendid. It's a shame it's just rather dull, its length being its biggest drawback. The conspirator behind the war is like Palpatine from Wish.com, behind the deception of the war to divide and conquer in attempt to obtain the key to time.
The key to time.
Look, I'd really like to help you, but I've got a problem. You see, the thing is that the segments are in there. Do it.
Now the stories which we have just covered right now, I wouldn't go out my way to defend them. I wouldn't go out my way to recommend them, nor will I go out my way to sit down and watch them. There'll be other 4th Doctor stories I would gladly, without hesitation, watch over these. But these stories coming up, 7 in Z tier, I would gladly defend. So let's see them.
Number 27. The Ribos Operation. Can you seriously tell me what this story is about, besides it being the first key to time story? Because the Ribos Operation might be the most invisible and least talked about 4th Doctor story ever. I can even tell you anything about it before I viewed it in the marathon. A script also by Robert Holmes, the man who created the Nestines, Autons, the Master, the Sontarans, introduced Sarah Jane Smith, Morbius, Rassilon, the Valiar, Barusa, and then spawned this. A story so invisible I didn't even realise Robert Holmes written the story in the first place. And unfortunately, I think its exposition of setting up the heat of time is probably more interesting than the self-contained story itself. It's a rather plot-light and self-contained story with more of a focus on humour to drive the story, and the season's plot itself, as I said, overshadows the story itself of why the key to time is important to prevent chaos from spreading in the universe and destroy the equilibrium and balance of good and evil, which can only be done when assembled together with all 6 pieces. You also have the introduction to Mary Tam's Romana, who is underrated, stunning and sophisticated. Mary Tam left us far too early. So yeah, it's unfortunate that the exposition is more interesting to the setup of the arc than the story itself. I do think that is true. However, I actually do like the Ribos Operation. I like the performances, I like the dialogue, I like the characters. It gives me the Romans and gunfighters vibe to the comedy, which is not to everyone's tastes. Performances are especially great, but it can be very silly in places, like the cliffhanger for episode 1 of the Doctor getting underneath a door that he knows will crush him, but just kind of stays there. It's just really stupid. Also, I'm just going to mention this, Rassilon's Rod. Yeah, Robert Holmes knew exactly what he was doing there, or I've just got a very dirty mind. Number 26. Full Circle is an underrated gem from Season 18, and one I would happily defend after losing my will to live with the Leisure Hive and, Meglos. Being a bit of a whatever story. Full Circle is much better, and Andrew Smith was only 19 years old when he conceptualised and adapted it for television. So Smith deserves credit for creating a story with a strong understanding of what the show is about and implementing captivating political narratives about a group of deciders obsessed with preserving the old ways. The ship has crashed and has been there for generations on the planet Azarius, but now we know that the ship always had the ability to take off in the first place, in about half an hour after the Doctor discovered it. All because the Three Stooges, more so 2 of them, decided that was the best for the colony. How the Marshmen connect to the story is pretty cool, and while they might not be visually impressive or memorable, I think the idea behind them and their involvement in the story's events is more interesting than the monster itself. Which I feel Andrew Smith wanted to incorporate a strong narrative here rather than going for something like a returning monster, but to give us the impression what Andrew Smith could really do without using a popular monster, and I would say he succeeded. Mind you, it's not perfect and far from flawless. Some of the dialogue, it consists of being annoying to downright stupid. The cake belongs to Romana saying this when she interacts with spiders.
They're only spiders. They're only spiders.
I mean, that might be the dumbest thing that Romana is, or probably the only thing that Romana has said, which is just absolutely dumb. Yeah, this is just a spider too. This is just a fucking frog. Really bad dialogue.
It's also the story to introduce Adric. He does at times come across as very entitled and bratish. Much worse in State of Decay, mind you, but I would say finds his footing near Keeper of Traken and Logopolis. But not as bad as This freaking guy, who always seems angry 24/7, I think somebody stole his toys out of his pram or something. At times I feel the background characters just don't really give an absolute shit about the story. Again, very synonymous of season 17 and 18, I've noticed. Saying that, I really like the E-Space trilogy because we've yet to see State of Decay or Warrior's Gate. Yes, I do think Full Circle is the weakest from the trilogy, but Andrew Smith at 19 years of age knew the Doctor Who formula and delivered it well. That's what counts. Number 25. The Keeper of Traken is an odd one. It's that kid that sits in the corner, wants to socialise, but doesn't really end up bothering, so it doesn't really stand out. It may look boring and uninteresting on the surface level, but when you watch it, yeah, you end up liking it. That's my experience with the penultimate 4th Doctor story. So Traken is described by the Doctor as a world where people are really nice to each other. Even though about 20 minutes into the story, some of them are real dicks. Besides Tremas, who actually has a brain. And of course Nyssa too, obviously, she's goated. The rest of them, there's just no hope. The planet might as well have no hope and just fade away. So we find out the ancient ruler, the Keeper, is dying and in need of a replacement, but the crispy master, of course, has his own sinister plan to take control for himself and face the Doctor again. Their meeting was okay. Nowhere near the level of the Deadly Assassin, but Jeffrey Brevis's, yeah, he's awesome. Just never really flexed his crispy muscles and had the time to shine, but Big Finish did succeed in that department. Just listen to Master, believe me, you will not regret it. The idea of the Melker acting as a statue to manipulate people was a cool aspect of the story, but talking about the side characters besides Tremas and Nyssa, I found them frustratingly annoying as hell. Very antagonistic and sometimes downright stupid in their decision making, and went to ridiculous conclusions without logically thinking anything out. Yep. Just because the Keeper cries evil, yeah, that totally means that the Doctor is the enemy. You can't be that dense in the head. Parts of the story is quite dull, but it's by no means a bad story. It is good. Just a little frustrating in its delivery with the characters and a slow moving plot. Number 24. While Logopolis certainly doesn't hold a candle to the 10th planet and obviously the War Games, let's discuss first what I feel Logopolis does right. The story has a sense of all hope is lost, but a looming threat of entropy that cannot be avoided will happen, and it's inevitable. I think it's quite a big miss. The concept of entropy hasn't really been explored more within the series, only a handful of times. More so in the extended media releases building upon the lore surrounding entropy. What is also interesting is the connection of entropy, being chaos, with the Black Guardian, who represents both chaos and entropy, revealed in Enlightenment, which if the character is ever utilised again, I would like to see more about entropy. The plot to me feels heavy, emotional and bleak, but the fact this story has quite painful pacing, even for classic Who standards, I wouldn't be surprised if you prefer to watch paint dry, because my goodness, this thing is a slog, and for a 4-parter, let alone a regeneration story, that's not great. The Doctor in this episode is quite similar in stories like the Pyramids of Mars, like the Seeds of Doom. Less of his more witty and light-hearted side, but more serious about the looming threat that's about to happen. Especially when he finds out the Master survived. Speaking of the Master, the scene of Nyssa initially being tricked, of thinking the Master was her father, felt really weird in execution. I mean, really? Come on, Nyssa, you're smart and you're goated. How can you fall for that? But yeah, Anthony Ainley's Master is very much different compared to Delgado. His regeneration is more patient, calm yet cold, with an underlying sinister evil. It's been years since I last watched a story featuring Anthony Ainley, because I rarely pick up a 1980s Doctor Who story. I'm a 60s guy at heart, and I hold love for the 70s. The plot itself, like I said, it takes a freaking century to unravel about how Logopolis works and how it is used to keep entropy at bay, using pure mathematics and calculations, or structure, to keep the universe intact and in order. It then results in a final showdown at the Pharos project. Overall, yeah, I like the story. It's complicated, especially in the second half, but that's more to the fact that it's quite the slog. Number 23. One of the most fun and entertaining 4th Doctor stories from Season 15, an underrated season, which has its ups and downs of course, but I consider Sunmakers one of the higher achievers in the season. Despite it being common knowledge Doctor Who has delved into political themes, The Sunmakers is 100% one of those stories done in a very entertaining way while also being very politically relevant and establishing good writing with bold and entertaining characters. Though I feel The Sunmakers is stuck in a limbo almost. It doesn't know if it wants to be light-hearted or utilise dark themes. It tries to have both, but I feel they don't really complement each other. The main villain is the Collector. Is he threatening, intimidating? Well, no. He's almost comical. And I would call The Sunmakers a spoof and parody on corporatism that gives us a rather cruel, though realistic, depiction on taxation where the poor suffer to make ends meet, whereas the rich use loopholes to line their own pockets to avoid the system. Which the saying goes, rules for thee but not for me. Or do as I say, not as I do. Man, The Sunmakers really is an accurate depiction, isn't it? But this is where it struggles to find identity despite being a very enjoyable story. It's light-hearted and somewhat goofy in places, but has a dark and dystopian connotations. But maybe that's what gives The Sunmakers its charm, but I feel it just kinda doesn't know which way it wants to go. I think if it pushed more onto the dark and dystopian connotations and just a little bit less of light-hearted themes, I think it probably would have been a bit better. Despite the Collector not being threatening at all, Henry Wolfe depicts an obsessed, fanatical corporatist. His entire personality is about preserving and generating profit, and use malicious tactics to gain these profits. So the Collector is a funny spoof on an obsessed corporate figurehead, and I love his portrayal. Leela's dialogue too, saying rise from your oppressors and why is everyone afraid of the tax man, with a savage and primitive way of speaking, is perfect. Because she's saying it one way but has meaning behind it for the viewer, like worker revolution. Good writing from Robert Holmes. What goes against this story is supposed to care about the workers, the oppressed class, the marginalised by the corporate system who are underground, living like rats. But to be honest, they're very annoying and unlikable. That's the worst thing about it. They act like thugs, not revolutionaries. Put it simply, they're giant assholes. The filming location is brilliant for the setting, a dystopian setting filmed in an old tobacco factory. That's just works so well. But speaking about the Collector, the only thing I agree with him is time is money. Indeed, it is, just for completely different reasons. Overall, it's a good story with interesting themes that play in the real world, though I think it is a letdown in some places. Like I said, characters in the underground, they're just annoying and rather unlikable, conceited, and a little pretentious. Number 22. Robot. Quite an oddity in the 4th Doctor era, and could be perhaps on the weaker end of the post-regeneration stories as of now, comparing Power of the Daleks and Spearhead from Space, which I just believe to be the better post-regeneration stories to introduce a new Doctor, but then again they are both my favourite post-regeneration stories. But we're talking about Robot here. An oddity, as I previously stated, with the beginning of the Philip Hinchcliffe or self-proclaimed Golden Age of Doctor Who, opened with the Ark in Space. So Robot is kind of a forgotten little gem. Robot in terms of developing the Doctor reminds me of the style of the early 2nd Doctor stories like Power of the Daleks, the Highlanders, and the Underwater Menace. Quite whimsical and clownish, but in the 4th Doctor era, quickly establishing the 4th Doctor more grounded as compared with the 2nd Doctor, who, even though it's my favourite era of the show, it was kind of all over the place in terms of execution, but the moon base rectified the problem. Here, in Robots, following the arc in space, that problem isn't repeated. I can sum up Robots with a very simple sentence. It's an underrated Fourth Doctor story that offers the necessary gateway to the introduction of Tom Baker. That is its main objective, and it does that successfully. Now, most people around me, and perhaps my audience too, likely started with Tom Baker, as did I. Robots is likely one that you came to later, with the staples Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks taking the complete limelight in Season 12, or perhaps your childhood. While Robot, Sontaran Experiment, and most definitely Revenge of the Cybermen getting pushed aside to make way for the Titans. Robot is kind of all over the place. Some call it underrated, some downright love it, and some think it's rather strange and quite a jarring story format compared to the rest of the Fourth Doctor era, and frankly one you don't really see repeated. Saying that, Tom Baker's performance and charisma is simply top marks. Easily the best thing I or anybody can take away from Robot, with many famous lines and quotes, but at the same time that seems to be the only thing the majority take out of this story. Robot isn't one of the best Fourth Doctor stories, not by a long shot, but I doubt you will walk away hating the story. How the Robot is revealed with the incidental music to build up this villain, even though I put villain in quotation marks, it's pretty good, and it's been long since I've watched Robot, and how the robot breaking into the facility to steal information about a disintegrator gun, which becomes a plot point within the story, and the characters that are part of the plot who are using the robot for their own nefarious ends. That's why I use villain really in quotation marks, because the robot isn't actually a villain, or just being used as just a pawn. Christopher Barry, a splendid director, does a great job of slowly building up a villain, the robot, by not fully revealing it visually. That takes time, and that's just good cinematography. Visually, the robot is impressive too, although some scenes do look kind of goofy and funny when the Fourth Doctor is trying to get away from the robot. But what other elements do I like about Robot, apart from just the various lines and quotes from the Fourth Doctor? The fact that it introduces one of the most underrated companions ever, Ian Marter playing Harry Sullivan, criminally underrated despite being in such a famous season, Season 12, which I have a lot of nostalgia for. Maybe not in this story particularly, still Harry Sullivan freaking awesome. Now on to the actual main villain, being Hilda Winters. Hilda in many ways is quite sadistic. Sarah feels troubled about the robot being used and doesn't see it as just programming, which plays on the whole King Kong kind of comparison and joke people push on the story. The robot becomes mad by performing roles against its prime directive by Hilda, and having the same brain pattern as its creator Professor Kettleworth, and the program becoming a contradiction, and it breaks down, causing the robot to kill and murder people, which it does later come to the realization that it sees human beings as a flaw and something to be wiped out, so it eventually becomes a villain. It's basically a victim. Robot's drawback, however, is the pacing of establishing the plot, but I feel it is very witty with delivery and charm, and it does counter this problem for me. But yes, the plot is rather slow for a 4-part story. Again, you don't want something too dense being an introduction story for the Fourth Doctor. It's supposed to be centered around Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor. Let's establish him. So of course you don't want anything too dense. Number 21. Doctor Who is now entering the world of hammer horror imagery and direction with a rather underrated story from Season 14, which Season 14 is synonymous with Robots of Death, Talons of Weng-Chiang being fan favourites, and here we have the Masque of Mandragora, a pseudo-historical story. Well, encountering a deadly energy called the Mandragora Helix, with the story set in the 15th century during the Italian Renaissance. Also filmed in my home place of Wales. The film location is splendid. The scenes of cult members, sacrifices, worshipping, and the whole set design just brings the viewer together into the world of Hammer Horror, with Rodney Bennett directing the story. If you like Hammer Horror, yeah, you're probably going to like this story. Would you call it a favourite? Probably not. Whilst it's a good story, 100% underrated, it's not like a staple within the 4th Doctor era. This is one of the few stories to explore more rooms within the TARDIS, and the second console room is introduced in this story. The Mandragora is one of the most interesting anomalies in the show, a spiral of pure energy with a central intelligence, kind of similar to the Great Intelligence, lives in its own domain in the uncharted regions of the Time Vortex. Extended media does go further into the details about the villain, so it's up to you if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Giuliano and his uncle are at each other's throats about the ruling, with Giuliano now Duke wants a land of no tyranny or corruption and stands against Hieronymus about getting his predictions from the stars, which soon he plays a role with the Mandragora Helix. The evil Brethren with their hideous masks are quite scary, their masks generally looking even more hideous and frightening than some of the actual monsters that appear in the series. And as I said, it just complements it so well with the set design and being filmed within rural Wales. The story also plays a lot of respect in fleshing out the supporting characters, which is obviously a good thing. This now comes to the story's detriment. It is a rather talky story, and it's driven more on the characters, their corruptions of higher powers, therefore a slow burner. Compared to the Seeds of Doom, the previous story being a 6-parter, that story doesn't struggle once when it comes to pacing. In fact, it's very fast paced. This one, no, and it's a 4-parter. So I do feel after a while the story does outstay its welcome, and even though I dislike very little about it, I do lose interest in the story and the Helix becomes a little bit one-dimensional. And while I do like the laugh depicted by the Mandragora, when the Mandragora talks it sounds a bit naff. Despite that, yeah, it's a good story, not a favourite of mine. Episode 3's cliffhanger is one of my favourite cliffhangers in the show, and it's straight out of Hammer Horror. Number 20. Season 13 is so good. There are stories in the season which, if they were in a different season, they would be considered stone cold classics. In fact, they're underrated because season 13 has stories like the Pyramids of Mars, Terror of the Zygons, the Seeds of Doom, which are so sensational. They actually made stories like Planet of Evil, the Android Invasion, completely overshadowed. Brain of Morbius is a little bit of a stretch, but we are talking about Planet of Evil. Is it good? Damn right it is. When you put it against the Pyramids of Mars, which comes right after it, of course it's going to be up against it. While it's true, not everybody does like this story. In fact, some people say the set design is all the story has in terms of being a standout. Yes, the atmosphere in the set design is unique, spooky, and really symbolises the fear of the unknown, xenophobia. That something is lurking around the corners, in the shadows. The set design is stunning, and you feel that the Doctor and Sarah are at the edge of the universe. But I will agree, not everybody will find it a classic. Planet of Evil sees the successful partnership of Robert Holmes and script editor Philip Hinchcliffe as producer and Louise Marks to develop classic horror into their Doctor Who stories, and it's evident Planet of Evil was inspired by classic sci-fi from the 1950s like The Forbidden Planet and, of course, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Planet Evil is rooted in excellent Base Under Siege formula. The Doctor and Sarah travel to the deep edges of the universe to Zeta Minor, the final planet in the known universe and near the unknown, after receiving a chilling distress signal. Strange monsters made from antimatter stalk and roam the landscape and attack the military. The whole setup and plot of the story and the directions it takes, you can see the horror influences it takes, and this is my bread and butter. The beginning scenes of the military personnel putting signs up of the dead, the music and the sound design just all complements each other so well. The sound of the antimatter monsters, that sounds almost like a rattlesnake, with demonic growling, is terrifying. The hostility of the atmosphere too, which starts to make people on edge and build anxiety. Love it. Planet Evil, my kind of story, because the delivery of the sense of dread is so powerful in this story. What isn't on par is the characters themselves. Acting and performances, round of applause, brilliant. Characters themselves, a little dry. The Doctor's message about tampering with a planet they don't understand, talking about antimatter as an energy source, is a good message. The first half and the second half do feel like two different settings and stories. The first half being on Zeta Minor and the second half on the ship. Overall, it's a solid 8 out of 10 throughout, and Season 13 is so good that an 8 out of 10 story is considered low in Season 13. It's underrated, but I wouldn't call it a classic in the 4th Doctor era. But it's a great story that complements 1950s style of sci-fi horror in many aspects. Number 19. The final story for Sarah Jane Smith, and what we presumed to be a final story, but became an icon amongst the fandom. However, the original companion departure from the 4th Doctor era was a rather odd one. The Hand of Fear, featuring the villain Eldrad. Written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, the Doctor and Sarah land back on Earth in a quarry and immediate danger as explosives are rigged to explode. The blast leaves Sarah unconscious with a fossilized stone hand in her grip. A strange alien power is now controlling Sarah to return in her full form, Eldrad. Despite having an important meaning to depart Sarah Jane Smith, this story, as I said, is an odd one, and I've only watched it twice, that including the marathon I'm doing. My first experience, I didn't really think too much of it in terms of a story, and the only notable point I remember about this story is the final scene saying goodbye to Sarah. But how did the second viewing fare? Well, it got an 8 out of 10, so it clearly did something. The opening scene and prelude of Eldrad's race calling her a traitor adds some great dimensions to the character, and you ask questions why she betrayed her race and her motivations, alluded to being a tyrant amongst her people, and sentenced to the deep space. Very nice opening and very psychedelic as well. But it makes sense of why some people call this story a mess in the first place. The Hand of Fear had many technical issues behind the scenes, with multiple writers having their hand of determining the specific character fates, and delays within the script caused complications, which does link to episode 4, because it seems episode 4 is where people have a problem with this story. But episode 1 is an interesting opening for Sarah to have a unique role of being possessed by Eldrad and utilising a powerful ring. I give props to the filming. The scenes of Sarah are really well done, which conveys a very sinister feeling. Props to the direction by Lenny Mayne with those scenes, and by the way, the incidental music, again, sinister. I love it. Episode 1 is solid and underrated Doctor Who. I push a 9 out of 10 for episode 1. Sometimes the hand moving around does look a little goofy, a little silly, but I won't be too harsh on it. Supporting characters? Meh. I wouldn't say the cast is memorable. To give the story credit, it's very well paced. It doesn't dip or slow down at all. Saying that, I enjoyed episode 4, but I know they had a lot of problems behind the scenes. Overall, I consider it an underrated story. It's rather strange, but I enjoy it. Number 18. Doctor Who entering the world of Hammer horror yet again, with the combined forces of Robert Holmes, Terrance Dicks, Philip Hinchcliffe and Christopher Barry. I would call that the dream team to provide this story, the brain of Morbius. And if you know me, yeah, of course, Hammer horror, one of my favourite things ever. And I think it's heresy that How on earth I have not done a video on Hammer House of Horror. Yep, things will be branching out on the channel. Yet the story begins by the Doctor and Sarah landing on the planet Khan, with both the mystic Sisterhood of Khan and Professor Solon, a crazed fanatical scientist who is devoting his life to resurrect and restore a dangerous Time Lord criminal known as Morbius, with great depictions of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But the only way he's managed to do it is with an amalgamation of different life forms to store his consciousness. Solon is played by Philip Maddock, the same person who played the Warlord in the War Games. Such a talent, performs the mad scientist role to complete perfection and excellent monologues. This story is limited on action, that's not what it's going for, but the power of the script, the acting, the character dynamics is what pushes this story. Some might like this approach, others might not. It's not fast paced by any means, it's quite of a slow burner. The Sisterhood of Khan have some feud with the Time Lords. Big Finish have expanded upon this, and predict the Doctor and Sarah are to steal the elixir, which if emptied would lead the end of the Sisterhood. The Sisterhood of Khan are straight out of Gothic horror, so I immediately love them, and they do some splendid performances, all of them, even the background characters, splendid. Solomon in the beginning is devious, especially what he wants to do and achieve with the Doctor to resurrect Morbius. Yes, I would say the middle portion of the story is pretty slow, a lot of dialogue and pacing is something some would struggle with, especially if you come from the new series. The Doctor is trying to convince the sisters about the story with the Time Lords regarding the elixir, and Solomon's intentions of reviving Morbius as his brain is still intact and hasn't been destroyed. The best parts of Brain of Morbius, of course, is the monologues and the enraged ramblings of a madman who wants to prove the universe wrong by reviving Morbius to rule the universe. What suffers, yes, is the pacing. Poor Sarah ends the majority of the story blind and impaired, which Solomon uses as his advantage to put the Doctor in a trap, and Morbius becoming more insistent to move to desperate action. The final scenes of Morbius going insane and the Time Lord wrestling scene with Morbius vs the Doctor is iconic. Overall, an excellent story if you're looking for Doctor Who meets Gothic horror. Look no other than the Brain of Morbius, although the ending for Morbius was pretty weak, should have been executed better, but besides that, it's a great story. Number 17. Douglas Adams' debut in Doctor Who with his crazy and brilliantly bonkers idea, which definitely have their own charm and flair, The Pirate Planet. A story with a mix of crazy ideas blended in a fun, unique and memorable Doctor Who story, focused on light-hearted and comedic takes of sci-fi concepts. You're either going to love this story to death or find it jarring as hell. It can go either way. It's a much more livelier and better ideas and flamboyant concepts that stand out compared to the Ribos Operation. The Doctor and Romana head for the second piece of the Key to Time and were supposed to head it to the planet Califrax, but end up on Zanuck and face Bruce Purchas, role of the Pirates Captain, who does a flipping good job at the role, and filmed in places like Berkeley and again my home of Wales, such as places like Ebbw Vale. Bruce Purchas being the iconic figure and his design is fantastic. Brilliant dialogue, just Doctor Who being weird as it possibly can. The story can be summed up like this.
Mr. Fibulate! Mr. Fibulate! Think of poop!
Calling Mr. Fibulate, Mr. Fibulate.
Mr. Fibulate! Mr. Fibulate!
His character is the playbook of every dictator in history. Offers peace and prosperity, but is a complete lunatic out for his own benefit. So he's funding the destruction, but also funding the peace and prosperity bit as well. God, that sounds so familiar, doesn't it? The drones, under the pirate captain's command, are almost as bad, comically, as the scuba diver foot soldiers in the War Games. Completely dumb in a comical way. It's not all gold, the Mentoid stuff isn't that all interesting and feels rather loose to the narrative, rather one-dimensional and boring in my opinion. Part 2 does reveal more of the sinister parts of the pirate captain, even though I struggle to take it seriously until the halfway mark. He attacks other planets by moving his fortress connected to a mountain, steals all valuable minerals through the lies of peace and prosperity, leaving them empty and worthless, destroying their society. Even though it's utterly ridiculous in some places of the story, it does have dark undertones. The Pirate Queen is a character who ends up being more interesting as the story progresses. We just think that she's just merely an assistant in the beginning, but we're kind of seeing the dynamics of the hierarchy compared to the Pirate Captain and the Pirate Queen. So it does that very well in my opinion, but Bruce Purchase is clearly the winner of the story. He goes from calm, sad, angry, aggressive in like 2 seconds. So he plays the character of a lunatic very well. The robotic parrot is both hilarious and silly, yet suits the character. It's a fun story with dark undertones. Number 60. The first time I watched this one, I record not really understanding it. Maybe I was too dumb at the time. That is Warrior's Gate. I've only experienced this story, again, twice, and it's likely been 6 or 7 years since I last experienced it. And may I say, it's a damn good story. The execution, the production, I appreciate it. It's like a 1980s attempt at the Mind Robber with very strange and abnormal locations and places. Not really explaining all the locations, which to me goes into the story's favour. And it might be one of the strongest stories from the entire 80s era, with excellent themes of history and slavery. Apparently Tom and Lala had real problems on set with this one, but I think it shows more in State of Decay personally. Here I don't really see it, but I guess that testifies that they did really, really well with their acting. And I can testify to that as Warrior's Gate did go through some extensive rewrites and rehearsals. Tom and Lala were pretty critical of this story, especially the departure where Lala Ward stated the ending scene lacked any sort of emotion or meaning and just happened. Yeah, the departure was rubbish, and Lala very brashly just deciding to go with Leo the Lion, as I'm gonna dub him, felt so inauthentic. But that alone gives Lala credit as a person, because even though Tom and Lala had their problems during this point in time, she voiced disappointment in the departure, saying it felt rushed and flat, which as I said testifies to Lala's character, who had love and respect for the show. Adric was kind of useless, didn't really do anything, but Waterhouse does feel more comfortable in this performance and in the role compared to the previous stories. Supporting cast are solid. The human crew who have been trapped in E-space feel realistic, like all the characters. Their mental state at times, acting in desperation, making them do brash things, feels very real. Warrior's Gate excels in its visuals and its ideas with brilliant set design and concept. There is literally only 4 locations in this story. The empty void, the gothic dead chambers, the human crew's ship, and the grayscale world when entering the gateway. A complicated but splendid story. I urge you to revisit it if it's been a while. You might have a change of heart. Number 50. And here we have the best attempt in the 4th Doctor era of Doctor Who doing Hammer horror with a science fiction twist. But the one we're talking about, and the best depictions of Hammer horror in the 4th Doctor era, certainly goes under the radar but isn't discussed that much. Image of the Fendahl. And before the marathon, besides specific scenes, it isn't really a 4th Doctor story that stood out to me initially. So rewatching clearly changed my mind on this one and how I view it. In my opinion, Image of the Fendahl is the most Hammer horror style Doctor Who story ever. So if you like Hammer horror, then yeah, you're gonna like this one. Old fashioned manor houses, a man you don't know the name of whistling in the forest, feeling he's being watched, scientists doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, check. The skull having unknown mysterious powers, check. And the villain, check. Checks all the boxes off for Hammer House of Horror. The scenes of the forest and the mist is actually pretty terrifying and unsettling, puts you on edge, and how these scenes play with the skull lighting up and the machinery acting with the incidental music, so well done. What's pretty creepy is the body of a man who was killed in connection to the skull. The body is decomposing at a rapid rate. Episode 1 and its cliffhanger, stupendous. The embryo Fendahl might not look the best, but it does get intimidating when it's in the manner. Then it's pretty effective. The second time watching Image of the Fendahl, and this story turns out way better than I remember it. I've got more Hammer House of Horror tropes in this story compared to any other Doctor Who story that goes for that theme. Even more than the Daemons, this is straight out of the series, with just Doctor Who slapped onto it. Criminally underrated. Number 40. If you know me, I am a big fan of the wilderness years of Doctor Who. Some of my favourite stories within Doctor Who comes from the wilderness years, the Virgin books, the BBC PDA and EDAs. And this story alone by Terrance Dicks is responsible for a lot of lore and world building in the wilderness years, including the Time Lords and the Great Vampires and their war, and then fantastic books such as Goth Opera, Blood Harvest, and Vampire Science. I am of course referring to State of Decay by Terrance Dicks.
State of Decay was the story that actually changed the most radically. First time I watched it, I was like, meh, it's alright, it's okay. But now, since I'm going down the rabbit hole of the wilderness years, does State of Decay do I appreciate a lot more. As I said, if you love your wilderness years stuff, have a look and go back to State of Decay after you've read stuff like Goth Opera, Blood Harvest, Vampire Science. Yeah, it's gonna go up 100%. So if you read those books, watch State of Decay, yeah, you're gonna like it more, trust me.
With my ever-growing appreciation and love for the wilderness years of Doctor Who, naturally my love and appreciation for State of Decay has gone up exponentially. Yes, in the past I didn't really talk a lot about it, but times have changed. I absolutely love State of Decay. We visit these native people on the planet who live in fear of the wasting and the Free Lords, being vampires of Zargo, Camilla and Yukon, who rule from an imposing tower, and these vampires are servants to the last great vampire who fled to Eastbase, who they plan to revive. In terms of the story, it's really simple, straightforward narrative. Along with excellent performances from the villains, they just nail the role perfectly, and Terrance Dicks' incredible writing charm. Adric in this story does make me want to put nails in my eyes. He was that insufferable in this story. His entitled attitude I just hated. Far worse than Full Circle, but he does calm down after the Eastbase trilogy, so it's not a problem which persists for me. State of Decay is the worst story with Adric in my opinion. But yeah, this is the first time Doctor Who properly tackles vampires, and Terrance Dicks used the show's mythos and mystery, such as linking the Great Vampires to the Time Lords. That is just chef kiss. Terrance Dicks also incorporates socio-political themes on feudalism of the Lords, or in this context, acting as the ruling class, draining the energy of the poor for their own benefits and goals, such as feeding the Great Vampire, and in constant state of fear of the wasting to keep them in line, and also ignorant of the nefarious purpose they are being subjected to. State of Decay is just an excellent story. I wouldn't call it an absolute classic and my favourite, one of my favourites, but I do love it because of its incredible lore which we see in the wilderness years. It just builds on State of Decay, and I just love that. Number 30. If I am to go off a gut and say what is the most underrated 4th Doctor story, it would belong to this one. It could actually be the most underrated Doctor Who story ever. Why? Because it's in a season where the other stories are simply so good that this story gets completely overshadowed. That story is The Android Invasion by Terry Nation, and his most underrated piece of work in Doctor Who. The aliens, the Krauls, have developed android-like replicas of people in an English village of Devonshire, and the nearby space station occupied with androids. The Doctor and Sarah are immediately attacked by very weird masked individuals with finger guns. So why are the Krauls doing this operation in a small village and the connections with the space station? Episode 1 I would actually call flawless. Not like Hammer horror creepy, but just uncomfortable. The scenes of these people who don't say a word and have this blank stare was so well done. If you're an introvert and hate making eye contact with people, this would be your definition of hell.
Well, somebody say something.
To all the introverts out there, I'm very sorry for doing that. It probably brought back some memories.
It's one of those very few Doctor Who stories which actually makes me uncomfortable. But in a good way, obviously. Yes, because it's clearly well written and directed, it just has that effect on you. And if a story has that effect on you, uncomfortable but for good reasons, that's just a indication of solid writing and directing. The whole opening episode is odd, and that's why I love it. The desolate and empty surroundings of the village, besides just nature. And then when they enter the pub, the unnerving factor is kicked up to 9,000, dare I say. If this episode alone was just the whole Android Invasion, the Android Invasion for me could be one of the all-time great Doctor Who stories for me. Unfortunately, it isn't quite that. Planet of Evil and Android Invasion I refer to as the two imposter stories from season 13. Are they the best from the season? No, but some people might give them higher praise than the majority. I urge you to give them a watch if you haven't. Episode 3, more specifically the second half of the episode and towards the conclusion, is where the Android Invasion suffers. It's just too much talking, and you don't really feel sympathetic for Cravon, who's really been brainwashed by the Krauls. I only view him as a traitor who was just brainwashed by the Krauls and that's it. No sympathy whatsoever. Also, he was determined to kill the Doctor, but with a flip of a switch in his brain decides to keep the Doctor alive. It just felt very unnatural, his whole thought process. So the story went from a 9.5 out of 10 with episode 1, a 9 out of 10 with episode 2, a 7 out of 10 with episode 3, and a 7 out of 10 with episode 4. Terry Nation failed to maintain the feel of what was done in the first half. The scenes of the Krauss ship was just boring. Just like the Krauss, really. It kind of brings it back in some ways of a duplicate copy of the Doctor and some funny dialogues and scenes, but ultimately it could have been a lot better than the placement it has within this ranking, so that says a lot. Unfortunately, it's at number 13. Number 12. City of Death, considered a Hall of Famer, a classic amongst classics, and some of the best when it comes to classic Doctor Who. While I don't consider it a favourite Doctor Who for me personally, in reality it's the best in the later seasons, besides one story we have yet to see. It's just personally for me, I just like my bleak, more gravitas style stories, but for a comedy, the praise is warranted from its concept, script performances, atmosphere, and a very well made Doctor Who story, which is 100% a great choice for someone who wants to begin watching classic Doctor Who stories. Very accessible, it's funny, witty, might even be borderline silly in places, but Doctor Who has been doing that since the 60s. The Romans, the Mythmakers, the Chase, to name a minor few. The concept of the City of Death is excellent, having a plot centered around time travel, which oddly Doctor Who rarely incorporates into the classic Doctor Who stories. Pretty ironic, I know. If I was to take a dig at anything, I would say its pacing is its biggest drawback, and the climax is a bit, well, anticlimactic but funny at the same time. Poor Scaroff gets absolutely obliterated. While amusing, it's not the direction I would have personally took. Tom and Lala's performance is indeed amazing in The City of Death. The first episode captures that holiday and sense of freedom and joy before all the weird time anomalies happen and makes perfect use of Paris. Julian Glover is menacing yet charismatic in his performances, and he plays the role exceptionally well. Comes across as an upper class, rich individual and a snob, but who loves his family and at the same time acts completely inhuman in some places, which he sees as a compliment, which is actually my favourite line in the story. Duggan was great, if a little jarring in some places, but I do feel that that was entirely the whole point of his character, to be jarring. How the Mona Lisa gets stolen and incorporated into the story, linking to Scaroff's plan to reunite himself with the Jaggeroth species was very clever. Production was flawless, like the inset locations and the Jaggeroth ship. Not really the Jaggeroth itself, it looked rather goofy. I am surprised his actual face didn't crush himself while wearing that mask. How did that mask stay on so properly? I guess Jaggeroth technology and that. But yeah, overall a classic story. Not my personal favourite 4th Doctor story, but still a brilliant classic. Number 11. Now, even though this is an unproduced and cancelled Doctor Who story, it makes sense to feature it in the ranking video because a DVD animation release did come out. And when else am I going to talk about Shada? Shada was an exciting watch for me because it was the first time I experienced the story besides looking at a few clips. I've never experienced it at all in any form of media. Novelization, adaptation, Big Finish audio. It's had so many different versions and adaptations. Shada has had it all. Then we had the animation in 2017, which is how I refer to it in this ranking, because it makes the most sense. I wanted to include it, even though it wasn't finished, and this might be controversial, I prefer it to City of Death. I believe the animation did well to blend with the actual footage. While initially jarring, it did turn out to be fairly pleasant of a viewing experience. No cliffhangers, which did feel a little strange. It runs the full, complete story from start to finish, so pacing might feel a bit off for some. I absolutely adored the location shots of Cambridge and the villain Skaga. His motivations alongside his strong performances are playing well. A gigantic, grandiose narcissist, which gives this guy a run for his money, but it was just more interesting and multi-dimensional with Skaga. He did flipping well to give that impression to the viewer of just a grandiose narcissist. His dress sense, his body language, it gave off this superiority mindset that everyone around him was beneath him. The addition of Gallifreyan history playing a part in the story, adding further mystery and complexity to the Time Lord society, was perfect, and why I prefer it over the City of Death, because it was so rich within lore and world building within Doctor Who. That's why I rank it over the City of Death. But I do wonder how Doctor Who's history would have been following Douglas Adams' vision. I thought the humour was well balanced here in Shada, while I thought the City of Death was more overly humorous. It seems I preferred Douglas's more balanced approach to his script, or at least what we got compared to City of Death. This is all very subjective, but Shada is just more my style compared to City of Death, and yeah, the Pirate Planet too. A smart, witty, yet wonderful, slightly small set of characters in this story. The story doesn't feel overly bloated with side characters as some stories within season 17. I feel without cliffhangers, some people would have an issue with it. I don't really have that issue. A splendid story that sadly never made it due to the strike actions. If you haven't experienced it, I suggest you should. It's easygoing, humorous in its tone, and captivating at the same time, with very interesting world building, lore, and performances.
Now, after goodness knows how long this video has been, we are finally at the top 10 4th Doctor stories, the best of the best, and some of the best stories in the whole show. I think one story might come to a surprise, which you haven't seen, which is from the later seasons. If you've been paying attention, you know what it is. But yes, let's go over the top 10 4th Doctor stories. All these are just flipping fantastic.
Number 10. A unique and one-of-a-kind story in the 4th Doctor era, featuring no companion, and bringing back after so long, in appearing in the Frontier in Space, even though that was sadly not the original intentions. The Deadly Assassin by Robert Holmes. Set on Gallifrey, the Doctor has finally gone back to his home planet, but not by his own free will, but summoned by a vision of the Matrix, drawn to a web of political intrigue and assassination, and the Master lurking in the shadows as the formed husk of a Time Lord. The lack of companion here works perfectly, because the story is on Gallifrey. It's the Doctor's story. It's only connected, and should only be connected, to the main character. A battle and something the Doctor needs to face alone, and built up all the way to the beginning with an earthly child. The Doctor fled Gallifrey. It works good as a standalone story, being companionless. For the Deadly Assassin, I don't believe the story would have worked if it featured a companion. The dark, twisted and deformed figure of the Master is a perfect way to reboot the villain after Delgado's role. The level of intrigue and mystery surrounds the character, with how long the villain is made absent following the events of Frontier in Space. The whole concept of the Master here is spectacular, cunning, deceitful, vicious and twisted. The Deadly Assassin has a very respectful reputation within the fandom, and I can see why. But just the whole idea of why the Deadly Assassin was to prove to Tom Baker that a companion was a necessity for the show. This was only tested for one story. In my opinion, it freaking works. The story is very psychedelic, even in the beginning of the Doctor's Matrix visions of himself performing an assassination attempt, and considering I haven't watched this story in ages, brings a lot of intrigue. The Doctor has to convince and get past the Time Lords in order to warn the President about an assassination attempt, even though the vision implied the Doctor took the shot. One of the richest Doctor Who stories with establishing continuity, opening the doors to the extended medium the Wilderness Years, building more ideas like the Matrix, the Celestial Intervention Agency, which if you connect all the dots together, that links to Season 6B with the War Games and Before Spearhead from Space. It's just all fantastic and I love it. Anything world building and lore is just my bread and butter. Episode 1 and 2 did a great job setting up the political system on Gallifrey, which we never saw or expanded on in the Invasion of Time. That was just, that angered me so much, because, it's chef's kiss in the Deadly Assassin, but it was just never built on again, but it just never did it in the Invasion of Time, and it should have been. They then have to produce evidence of the Master's involvement behind the assassination attempt of the President, otherwise the Doctor will be vaporized. He enacts Article 17 to have at least 48 hours to produce the Master, being responsible for the crimes and run of the presidential candidate. However, episode 3 and 4 I think detract from what the previous episodes already established. It was visually very impressive and captivating. To put everything into perspective, episode 1 and 2 are a 9, episode 3 and 4 are an 8. The Matrix was well done, and the lack of Master and the Doctor's interactions actually ended up having good and tense build up until their inevitable face-off, with some good twists and reveals. The Eye of Harmony was explained, and then some brilliant story set fully on Gallifrey for the first time. 9 out of 10 is what I will give it. Number 9. Such a popular one-off monster from the 4th Doctor era, they were brought back for the 50th anniversary of the Day of the Doctor. It's no other than the Terror of the Zygons. And with every Zygon story we have, being the TV series, books, Big Finish, Terror of the Zygons is the OG. It is still the best story depicting the Zygons that we've ever had in the entirety of the show's history, and I doubt it will ever be topped. Set in the Scottish village of Tulloch, with sightings of the Loch Ness Monster, a huge cyborg monstrosity created by the Zygons called the Scarazon. The Zygons plan to take over the Earth and take it for their own. What makes the Zygons unique is their ability to shapeshift, which isn't the only monster to do so, the Rutans can do it as well. But talking strictly Terror of the Zygons, really well done. Back to form of what we had in the Pertwee era, featuring the Brigadier and the complete unit team, along with Harry too for his departure as the TARDIS companion. But this actually acts as the final complete unit story, which is really sad. But the production team and Doctor Who has always been about change and innovation. And what did it innovate into? Potentially the best season and era of all time. Season 13, in my opinion, is my favourite season from the Tom Baker era. I love all the stories, obviously some more than others, but it's solid. The Zygons were popular for many reasons. For one, they look absolutely incredible, even more than the new series, by absolute miles. The idea was created by Robert Banks Stewart with James Archson and John Friedlander, with their designs resembled as oversized embryos and a coral-like design. The scenes of the Zygons first appearing and spying on Sarah through Adia's head is straight out of Hammer Horror. The whole build-up to them is amazing, but then again it's directed by Douglas Camfield, who is a real talent with a strong portfolio of directing. Speaking of Terror of the Zygons, I'm actually feeling about watching the Terror of the Zygons today while recording this and scripting this part of the video, so I guess I'm going to be watching Terror of the Zygons now. This scene of them operating the Scarazon is pretty unnerving and excellently delivered to build suspense. What's scary about the Zygons are how easily they can integrate with human skills, like using weapons. Part 1's cliffhanger with a Zygon went into complete jumpscare mode. That cliffhanger would honestly scare the bollocks off you if you watched it as a kid. Sister Lament 2, my word does she make your skin shiver, she's a scary ass woman. Lilith Walker delivered the role to a T. She acts so cold and yet emotionless, creepy and unnerving. The Duke of Forgill too is odd and acts really medieval in his words. The Zygons, both in their form and under human form, are equally intimidating. Now that's good directing and acting. Just when you think the story ends, it actually doesn't. And that's why I appreciate Terror of the Zygons quite a lot. Overall, it's an incredible 4th Doctor story. Despite being so good, I wouldn't class it as one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time, but it's a strong 9 out of 10 for the Terror of the Zygons. Number 8. My favourite 4th Doctor story from the later seasons. If you were paying attention, you know what it is. It might be crazy, or even criminal, heresy, that I rank this over the City of Death, but I do. Perhaps regarded as the best story from the Key to Time season for many. It's difficult to say, it kind of varies. The Andros of Tara is sci-fi Doctor Who and spin on the novel The Prisoner of Zendar. Writer David Fisher not only creates a story and plot full of charm and wit, but Fisher knows how to develop and create wonderful characters with its dialogue and its writing. Also, Michael Hayes' first credit directing a story, and it looks like someone who understands the story inside and out, directed the story. It's crazy. The location shooting of the episode, the themes of the story, and the characters on Tara gives this story such a strong identity. It stands out like the pirate planet, but this one even better. What the story does different here is Romana finds the key to time segment in the story, pretty much instantaneous, and then Romana is attacked by this, well, thing. We'll forget about Bigfoot here. And Romana is escorted away by Mr. Creepazoid. As well, this story has some of the best dialogue ever. The androids and the actors performing as androids, the way they act in this cold and expressionless manner sometimes is real talent. And when they say they want to disassemble Romana, and seeing this man's face when he says it is a little concerning. The whole scene regarding Romana tied up and in this operating scene is unnerving. Grendel is plotting to seize the throne of Tara from the rightful heir. Reynard, who wants the Doctor to fix the android of himself to use to avoid being assassinated. Characters are wonderful, top-notch in performances and writing, absolutely fantastic. Episode 1 begins the story at a very, very high level. If I was to rate stories based on dialogue alone, this would be top 5 easy. It's a very fun story, great charm. Despite it being well liked, I think it's better than the common ratings it gets with like 7s and 8 out of 10s. It is a 9.25 for me, a solid story in the Key to Time saga. Number 7. Without question, the most famous whodunit Doctor Who story and a bona fide classic in Doctor Who. I have a lot of fond memories of the Robots of Death. In fact, I recall it in my childhood, but the Robots of Death was the story I rewatched probably the most out of everything. Quite the achievement. Been about 4 or 5 years since I last watched it. Philip Hinchcliffe was the person to push the idea of a story featuring robots, and tasked by Chris Boucher, who written the previous story, The Face of Evil. Its inspiration is linked to one of my favourite authors of all time, Agatha Christie, of a sci-fi whodunit, with murders committed and a plot to unravel with creepy programmed robots performing the killings, which is against their original program directives. The man or woman responsible uses dialogue of "be free", indicating their programming is only a bunch of code that enslaved them. The story is set aboard a sand miner. Robots are divided into class with dumbs, vox and super vox, and corpse markers left on the victims who have been murdered. A lot of rich storytelling here, like Caldor, which plays well in the extended media, like the Robot series by Big Finish, and the sequel called Corpse Marker from the BBC book range. Part 1 I have so much nostalgia for, takes me back to my childhood, and the character's spectacular, much better than The Face of Evil. Say that straight away. Yeah, painfully dull. Here it's much better, so for me I consider The Face of Evil a one-off dud. Robots of Death is simple, and a great opener for beginners to the classic series. The incidental music for the robots lingering around will always be tense. No matter how many times you watch it, you know the whole process of the story and how it goes. Their emotionless voices has a very sinister vibe to it, where a robot says, "Yes, I heard what you say." That little pause following "yes" just adds that little bit of a sinister vibe, nice attention to detail. The opening scene of explaining the TARDIS transcendental engineering will to me always be one of the most famous scenes in the show. You have a divide with the supporting characters. They suspect the Doctor and Leela being intruders, they're the murderers, but others think that's a rush to conclusions about who is the murderer. Some are more open-minded than others, which makes you guess and think each of the characters' placements. So, if you've never watched the Robots of Death, I will be really envious. Because I would love to re-experience the Robots of Death, completely forgetting that I've watched it. The story gets better and better the more it goes on for. You feel more connected with these characters. Who is next? The Doctor's line saying you're a classic example of the inverse ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. Magnificent. And then you have the magnificent David Collins, who was brilliant with the Big Finish audios, who is one of the more likeable and sensible characters who doesn't suspect a Doctor or Leela, but the scenes play out well in the order they are presented. It makes you think one way towards one character who could be the killer, and at least every character you do suspect in some way, shape or form. That's just talented writing by Chris Boucher. Including the killer themselves are suspected in some way in the story. It has equal balance, there is no biases between who probably committed the murder. There's some more obvious than others, but it makes you want to guess and think. That's the whole point of a mystery. You have the ruthless, money-hungry Uvana, who leads the sand mining operation, the calm and collected Drask, Borg, who is, doesn't really help his case. Overall, a classic episode, which is one of the best stories to begin your classic Doctor Who journey. Not a 10 out of 10 for me, I give it 9.25 out of 10. I do think few other 4th Doctor stories are better, but still a freaking brilliant classic. Number 6. The Ark in Space. Even though this story suffers with being slightly tatty and production not being the best, it's become a staple in the 4th Doctor era. It's a fan favourite among many, the beginning of the Philip Hinchcliffe era, and one of the first Doctor Who stories I watched back in the 90s. Despite having obvious flaws, The Ark in Space encapsulates what I love about Doctor Who. A splendid alien plot with the Wirren, atmospheric in its delivery, and managing to create something magnificent despite not having the best budget. Goes to show, budget isn't everything. It plays a part certainly, but the Ark in Space simply delivers in its other attributes pretty much flawlessly. That is why it is such a classic. Robert Holmes wasn't the original writer of the Ark in Space, it was in fact John Lucarotti, the writer of Marco Polo. The story was deemed, the John Lucarotti version, too convoluted, and decided not to follow with the story. Robert Holmes took control of the script and made the changes, which if Holmes didn't, I don't believe the Ark in Space would be a classic we see today. No disrespect to Lucarotti. I feel Holmes managed to make the Ark in Space more grounded, atmosphere focused, and a much more alien style monster with the Wirren, who were in fact a late addition by Holmes. In the beginning it feels like a setup to how a William Hartnell episode was delivered, and as well a Patrick Troughton episode too, by being based under siege on the space station Nerva, with an alien roaming around the space station that's on course to a new planet after fleeing Earth. The dialogue is just simply perfection. In fact, The Ark in Space has my favourite opening line in all of Doctor Who. This story is a great mood builder. I adore this story. The 4th Doctor, Sarah and Harry are an underrated TARDIS group, and one of the few stories I would love to go back to and experience for the first time with no knowledge or watching it on original transmission. The mystery in the beginning of Nerva seemingly out of action, desolate, and acts of sabotage have taken place, something happened a long time ago and they get tangled up in, is just simply just enjoyable. The Wirren, yes, they have been joked and teased for being tatty and the infamous bubble wrap monsters, but I feel it's criminal that they have only one TV story. They infect subjects by coming into contact with their larvae, and a metamorphosis is performed and the subject becomes a Wirren, well, I would say victim really, and are described like a space plague, floating around space, finding opportunities to colonize and subjugate worlds to preserve their species. So much more can be done with these monsters, so I hope one day that will be the case. Characters are instantly memorable, like Vyra, Noah, who splendid acting from the both of them. The way they talk and refer to them as regressors, as a threat to human survival, the Doctor and the companions, is an interesting plot, and making the insinuation that regressors played a part of corruption within the human race. It's quite troubling they said regressors posed a threat to the genetic pool and were eliminated. That sounded quite like a threat. Back to the Wirren. They were a lot more than just simple space bugs. Acts of sabotage, can manipulate the station to malfunction, and cause the station to prevent the crew from waking up, disabling defense weaponry, and turning off oxygen supplies. It's quite frightening how the Wirren take over Noah's mind too, acting like a mind parasite that you see in these nature documentaries. The scenes with Noah and the Wirren pretty chilling. To conclude, the arc in space is simply a classic, but if you haven't experienced it, give it a watch. It's a splendid 4-part story. Of course the budget isn't the best, which in terms of story, plot, monster and characters, it is pretty much flawless in that department. Number 5. The story to end the Philip Hinchcliffe era, the Golden Age, and perhaps the final story until we see the slow decline in Doctor Who, subjective where it starts. The Talons of Weng-Chiang is a famous story. Well-known supporting characters, iconic scenes, the creepy Mr. Sin, Magnus Greel, it's got it all. Awesome setup with a murder committed by a cybernetic dummy, missing women kidnapped, and a ravenous mutant rat in the sewers. Looks debatable, but an awesome concept. With set design, masterpiece in that department, capturing a Victorian setting to a T. It might be the best set design in classic Doctor Who. It is quite questionable in some components like its dialogue, but where it succeeds, it does tremendously, and deserves recognition for that. The Talons of Weng-Chiang also spawned and created one of the most well-loved Big Finish spin-offs named Jago and Lightfoot, who are adored supporting characters. They got their own series for goodness sake, and featured in extended media and the Wilderness Years. The story does start a plot with Leela, which unfortunately wasn't never fully explored, about the Doctor teaching Leela. Big Finish did wonders with that narrative to explore the character with much deserved development. Here in season 15 it was underutilized, which was a damn shame. So Talons attempts to start a character development arc that was never explored. Anyway, part 1 does a splendid job establishing Li Chang, the creepy Mr. Sin, the dummy's movement incredible, and the scenes of blood running down Mr. Sin's arm chilling. Top marks there. Jago being charismatic with splendid performances by Christopher Benjamin. It's heartbreaking Trevor Baxter and Christopher Benjamin are no longer with us, and also terrible that in this script I only list Trevor Baxter as no longer being with us. It is heartbreaking that Trevor Baxter and Christopher Benjamin are no longer with us, but I know for a fact when they did those Big Finish audios, they loved every second of it, and that is heartwarming. What the story is good is dividing it between the characters, exploring this supposed ghost theory in the theatre, Li Chang putting Jago off trial through hypnosis, very iconic scene, Lightfoot discovering the deaths, but I will admit it's a slow burning story, and what drives the story is the characters themselves. It's not like action packed or anything like that, it's not that type of story. Li Chang serves a faceless enemy called Magnus Greel, who gave him this mental ability, who is after the time capsule, who is trapped in Victorian London. Although Leela gets the short end of the stick in her reign in the story, in terms of developing a character, but here I think she shines more in her savage personalities coming out in front of Lightfoot. Pretty funny. In terms of Jago and Lightfoot, they don't cross paths until the very late parts of the story, which goes to show the characters shine so well solo. Work like bread and butter together, despite not having a lot of screen time together. My favourite part, 100%, is episode 4, where the Doctor is clowning Li Chang in the magic section. What Talons I feel suffers with is some quite questionable looking scenes. Pacing slow, but the charm of the story comes from the characters and has some of the best set designs and costumes in the era. A brilliant story to conclude the golden age of Doctor Who. Robots of Death and Talons go against each other a little bit, but I ever so slightly prefer Talons of Weng-Chiang. Number 4. I can't see how somebody would dislike this story. It has a strong reputation for a reason, and it's in the famous season 13, but on the higher end with the Pyramids of Mars. Wow, what a definite article. It's such a fun watch but beautifully dark at the same time. It flies by, and after you've finished your 9 to 5, it's Friday, turn this on, watch the stresses of work fade away into the abyss, because Pyramids of Mars will certainly boost your mood. It's the story with so much charm, splendid characters, the villain obviously is Gabriel freaking Wolf, and even the side villain of Marcus Scarman played by Bernard Archard, exceptional. The overall aesthetics of the story, excellent. The Doctor and Sarah are written to perfection. Sarah Jane is badass and assertive, which I love to see this side of the character. Sutekh doesn't really move, just sits on his chair for the most part, but there's of course a reason for that. But it goes to show his power scaling is utterly ridiculous, something out of Dragon Ball. Perhaps the most powerful villain in the whole Doctor Who canon, who can literally destroy anything. The TARDIS materialises in a 1911 manor owned by historian Marcus Scarman, who becomes the side villain. And one of the best side villains, mind you, truly menacing, who is under the control of Sutekh after coming into contact with the Osiris god. Sutekh is using Marcus as an animated puppet to build a rocket with the support of robotic mummies to aim at the Pyramid of Mars. Such a fun and entertaining plot. The setup of the episode with Marcus Scarman encountering Sutekh in Egypt is awesome. Projections of Sutekh's face in the TARDIS, the Doctor's famous quote of mistaking Sarah for Victoria and saying he walks through eternity. You already know Sutekh is no joke when a malevolent figure can appear inside the TARDIS. It doesn't mess about the Pyramids of Mars, it starts instantaneous. It has Abraham, a servant of Sutekh, using his robotic mummies. You get the vibe that he's part of a cult, which I really like that idea. It's not really explored too much, but I just love it. It feels quite realistic. Though he is quickly killed off by Marcus Scarman to replace him, and quite a striking cliffhanger, one of the best, which sets up future episodes. Lawrence Scarman is a wonderful side character, Marcus's brother, and the moments and scenes with his brother, Marcus, is tragic. The Doctor and his statements are haunting as he says the forces of evil are at work. The build up to this villain is one of the best. Freaking a lot better what we got in the Season 1 finale of the new series. What a load of shite for Sutekh. Looks like freaking Scrappy Doo from the Scooby-Doo movie. Yeah, not counting that. Marcus's appearance is cold and dead. Solid performances by Bernard Archard, which makes the relationship with his brother Lawrence just all the more tragic because, technically, he's already dead. Seeing the scenes of travelling to the 1980s to convince Sarah that Sutekh will destroy the world, with the world around a dead star, incredible. It's music to everyone's ears, and it deserves recognition and credit for delivering Sutekh. We see Sutekh in action in episode 3's cliffhanger and episode 4 with quite famous quotes and lines which you should be familiar with, causing the most imaginable pain but still keeping you alive, even though Sutekh has the ability to destroy every atom of your body, shows how much control he has with his power. Despite what people say about episode 4, when in the Pyramids of Mars, I actually enjoy it, but each to their own. You can see the budget, it's apparent, but I don't mind it. Budget is not the most important thing to me, but overall one of the best episodes in the show's history.
We have finally reached the final 3 stories in the 4th Doctor era. These are 10 out of 10 masterpieces. They literally shaped of what I love about storytelling, a narrative, horror, bleak gravitas writing. It is my bread and butter. 2 of them played a massive role in my childhood. And another one, I believe the whole story put together, it even rivaled the War Games it did. I believe it is potentially the best Doctor Who story ever. Let's cover the best 4th Doctor stories. 10 out of 10 masterpieces.
Number 3. Top 3 are goated. Absolutely the best of the best when it comes to Doctor Who. Throughout the 60 years of the show, this story will be one of the most, if not the most famous and well-known classic Doctor Who story, which was responsible for introducing us to Davros. Genesis of the Daleks was, as I mentioned at the start of the video, one of my earliest experiences of Doctor Who, and the love it gets is completely justified. It's pretty much flawless. It's a 10 out of 10 story, which you haven't experienced this classic Doctor Who story, it's mandatory you watch it to introduce you to classic Doctor Who. It's essential, no question or arguments about it. Performances, atmosphere, set design, plot, execution, Genesis of the Daleks has been overrepresented in media like crazy, but the original TV story is something truly special, and it always will be. I mean, the opening scenes alone with the Fangs being gunned down by the Khalids, the bleak depictions of war, suffering, with this cold and dread-filling atmosphere is incredible, with the feeling of being watched, an eerie wind, artillery fire, gunfire, accidentally entering a minefield, and the dead not even having the respect by still being used as dummies in trenches. The battle of attrition between the two factions is apparent, but the plot is more interesting, with the Doctor, Sarah and Harry by being dragged off course from the events of the Sontaran Experiment to go back to the genesis of the Daleks on the planet Skaro to prevent the development of the Daleks tasked by the Time Lords. If a story can give you that feeling of a sense of dread being established, it's gonna be freaking awesome for me, because that's what I like in a story, that it depicts a sense of dread. Even the freaking side characters in the beginning, like Raven, who plays a rather minor role, a prideful and ruthless fascist, which the Khalids act as great foreshadowing for their inevitable future. Acting is like a freaking 11 out of 10. Alongside Power of the Daleks, Fury from the Deep, Genesis of the Daleks has the best acting performances in any story ever. Nyder too, who again earns the medal as the most memorable supporting character in all of Doctor Who. Peter Miles is a talent. The Silurians, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Genesis of the Daleks deserves respect. Couldn't be better. Love Peter Miles' portrayal of Nyder. Genesis of the Daleks isn't outstanding because of the Daleks. It's Davros. Michael Wisher again, another OG. There's too many OGs in Genesis of the Daleks. I do like Terry Malloy's portrayal, but Wisher on the other hand, Wisher is the GOAT. Part 1's cliffhanger is one of the best cliffhangers of the show by revealing Davros for the first time, and his line about weaponry being perfect and revealing the Daleks is sublime. What I like about Genesis is it isn't black and white in who is good and who is evil. The Fouls are no better than the Khalids. They use expendable labour to move forward in weapons manufacturing, building rockets to destroy the Khalids, and not everybody in the Khalid Dome is evil. Some in the science and military division aren't evil either. Some have morals and principles, which I love. It goes to show war is started by a few individuals of political and militaristic power, and doesn't represent everybody or even the majority. So focuses on the grey area, makes the character dynamics so realistic. The Doctor and Harry here in the Khalid Dome to prevent the Dalek development understand not everyone is for the Dalek project. Sarah goes through a lot in the Foul Dome trying to escape from the rocket silo, with the party escaping by being shot at. Davros' plan to deal with the Khalid Tribunal to halt the investigation in his work is one of the most evil scenes I've ever seen in Doctor Who. It goes against the whole Khalid people and performs a genocide indirectly by manipulating both the Fouls into a fake victory with a rocket and the Khalids destroyed. One of the most evil acts in Doctor Who. Davros even pretends to act like a diplomat. Even though it's just manipulation makes Davros such a multifaceted villain and dangerous in many ways, just manipulating the fowl's lust for victory. When I always think of that moment, I do say to myself that Davros is the most evil villain in all of Doctor Who, over the Master. Episode 4, one of my favourite moments, underrated in terms of people mentioning the scene, but the Doctor risking his own life at gunpoint in an attempt to destroy the rocket from the Khalid Dome, believing Sarah and Harry were inside, with all priority forced on the development of the Daleks after the destruction of the dome. The scientific and even some military personnel are in constant guard by loyalists of Davros to make sure nothing eliminates the Dalek project and its progress. What puts Garman and other scientists on edge is the Daleks have no sense of right or wrong. This does, however, at the end of the story, it is Davros' downfall. Episode 5 and 6 has some of the best moments and lines such as, "Do I have the right?" Does the Doctor have a right to commit genocide? Would that make him no different to the Daleks? What would happen if the Daleks didn't exist? What would be the ramifications of that event? Overall, one of the best stories in all of Doctor Who. Popular, common opinion, sure, you can't really dislike it, it's just too freaking good. The best acting performances ever. Dialogue, plot, villain, Davros, it's got freaking everything. I love Davros' contempt on democracy and playing the Khalid's rebellion to stall them doing a democratic vote, and using Garman's words against him really puts Davros, in my view, as maybe my favourite villain of all time. Simply perfection. Number 2. Please share in the comments what is the story that was responsible for you being a Doctor Who fan in the first place. I still own the VHS I experienced all these years back, and I will never part with it. The story pretty much shapes what I like out of television. Horror. Gothic horror. Stories with a sense of dread. A feeling of apprehension that constantly keeps the viewer on edge, listener or reader. I am talking about the horror of fan rock. Horror fan rock is by Terrance Dicks. To begin the rather underrated season 15, quite a forgotten season, as you could consider season 15, well, at least I consider it, the slow descent into the show going downhill. But again, I will emphasize slow descent. Although I don't consider horror fan rock to begin the descent, in fact, I absolutely adore the story to death. It's a base under siege survival story set in a lighthouse of fan rock, with stories of a supernatural, glowing green and thick, abnormal fog bringing terror to the lighthouse keepers. This is what I consider one of my very favourite stories, and what I love about classic Doctor Who and television in general, and media for that matter. Also, it's quite sad because I consider horror fan rock the final swan song in classic Doctor Who, as fan rock, as I stated, things do go down for me in classic Doctor Who, and I don't believe in classic Doctor Who I would rate another story a 10 out of 10, but I will, when I'm doing the ranking of 5th Doctor, 6th and 7th, we'll see about that. What I love about the horror fan rock is its unpredictability of who will survive and who will die in the supporting cast. It brings the feeling of nobody is safe from the Rutan, and the abilities of the Rutan, as we find out later, is terrifying. It adapts well to its environment, its surroundings. It picks people off one by one, very similar to Predator, diminishing their numbers. The atmosphere, the sense of dread, isolation, it works in the story's favour and completes the Rutan. It's a rare insight into the Rutans, considering it's only one. It makes the Rutan all the more impressive. One can cause so much trouble and very difficult to track and outwit, symbolising a green floating jellyfish that has the power to shapeshift, and even more successfully than the Zygons, who require external power and technology to perform shapeshifting, the Rutans can perform shapeshifting through their own abilities. Considering they've been mentioned many times indirectly more than they featured in a story, I think they deserve another on-screen appearance. Very underrated villains, but they gotta be done right. And it would be fascinating to see the Rutans up against the Sontarans in a visual representation, but it can be a Big Finish audio, I can accept that too. The supporting characters are in a survival situation. A lot of drama between the characters, which is escalated due to the predicament of the creepy Ruben. I'd say is my personal highlight. And it gets more eerier and more creepy as it gets moving along. Episode 2's cliffhanger is freaking terrifying. When the Rutan possesses people and kills them, it also smiles at the same time. It goes to show how sadistic the Rutans can be. It enjoys the process of killing people and scaring people too, intimidating them. And episode 3 again, another fantastic cliffhanger. The dialogue sends shivers down your spine. The realization the Doctor has locked in the Rutan but not locked out will always remain one of my favourite stories of all time, because the stakes increase the longer the story goes on for. It gets more creepier, it's full of dread, the Rutan gets more cunning. It will always be a special story for me. But there is one story, one Fourth Doctor story, I rank over it, and to me, it is the best Fourth Doctor story. Let's talk about it. We have reached the end of the ranking, and in my opinion, the greatest Fourth Doctor story of all time. And in actual fact, it did potentially question my position of the War Games being number 1. Because Seeds of Doom is the only story in Doctor Who's history I consider to have 0 flaws. And excels in absolutely everything. Villain, check. Acting, check. Monsters, check. Cliffhangers, check. Bleak, foreboding. Tone, check. Pacing, check. Everything. The only reason why I would possibly rank it over the horror fan rock is because to me, it is everything I would possibly want in a Doctor Who story. The only story that can potentially beat Seeds of Doom from its placement and the War Games is Power of the Daleks is Recovered. That's the only possibility. It is 100% criminal. Freaking criminal. These monsters, the Krynoid, have only appeared once in the show. Absolutely freaking criminal. I love the severity displayed not only with the villain, but also with the Doctor concerned about it too. In my opinion, one of the best performances from Tom Baker in his acting. The Krynoids are my favourite one-off monster in all of Doctor Who. They aren't simply just spray-painted axons coloured green. The Krynoids are a parasitic alien race that live only to consume anything with living biomass. Yeah, I bet the Cybermen are having a party right now by that fact. And boy, aren't they established to perfection. The Krynoids like taking over a planet. The Doctor puts it bluntly and simply. All animal life was extinct. Simple as that. Scary and to the point. That's why these monsters are awesome. Even though this is a popular story, the Krynoids are freaking underrated. They could be and act like an intergalactic space plague. That's their level of threat, depending on the level of biomass and planets they subjugate. They're like the Wirren times 10, and even more synonymous with the Flood from Halo. Not only do they infect people, but they have psychological control over people and plants, like a mind parasite. And now humans are no longer the apex predator. animals are now prey alongside human beings. The psychic link of the Krynoids have over Chase. Excellent villain, mind you, almost just as good as the Krynoids themselves. They're just using him as a vessel to speak and make plant life the dominant life form over animals. In fact, the Krynoids have been depicted before of completely decimating other Doctor Who villains, even Daleks, and grown to almost a incomprehensible size depending how much biomass they consume. These monsters could really be a force to be reckoned with in Doctor Who. They could be like the big bad, a universal threat. That's how much I talk positive about the Krynoids. Part 1, the introduction of recovering the Krynoid pod being set in Antarctica, straight up giving you vibes from the Fang. Though less graphic, of course. This story still is stomach turning of how the Krynoids turn people into Krynoids. Chase's introduction and the slight organ music score, and his manor house surrounded by plants like he's some sort of crazy collector, might be one of my favourite introductions to a one-off villain. Chase, without even under the influence of the Krynoids, is still strong about preserving plant life. He uses Scorby to collect it. Again, excellent character, a hired thug and mercenary, and brutal in his actions. A man by the book, and doesn't like to leave any loose ends. You can see a lot of inspiration in this play to The Thing, which is John Carpenter's masterpiece, and which I consider a masterpiece. So, since I love The Thing so much, you gotta give credit to the Seeds of Doom. Scorby is a horrible sadist, even intimidating Keller to go through of killing everybody at the base just to get the pod, simply for money. The Doctor plays on Keller's weakness by not being like Scorby to get out of the predicament the Doctor and Sarah are in. Part 1 and 2 is based in Antarctica and honestly flies by. Such an entertaining and very fast-paced story, some memorable and brilliant one-liners from the Doctor, and damn, what an awesome cliffhanger for episode 2. Just because human beings and a corporate government system which Chase buys off are simply doing it for money, which results in people being killed. Greed is the player of preserving the pod, and considering how dangerous it is, and the corruption in the Department of Ecology, you guessed it, money. Dunbar, being the head of Ecology despite being against the killings, is still contributing to the problem because he's accepting money over human lives. Just speaks about real life, doesn't it? Even though we're not under control of the Krynoid, Chase is still a right nutter. Talking to plants and playing distorted music, saying it communicates with the plants. What a freaking weirdo. This man is something else. Imagine trying to kill somebody with a plant recycling machine. Things get bad to worse when Keller, who is a tragic victim in all this, who didn't really want to be involved, is infected with the Krynoid and is fed meat. Yeah, not very smart. All because of scientific curiosity. Oh, we've heard that before. I've said it before. The Seeds of Doom has everything. Absolutely everything. No flaws. And I mean the word perfect. It's a freaking 11 out of 10. It's a freaking billion out of 10. Tremendous human villains. Madmen with Chase and Scorby. The terrifying Krynoids. The madness of human beings. The government corruption. The dialogue. The one-liners. Acting, characters, pacing. Never loses steam from start to finish. It is the best Fourth Doctor story of all time. And yet, even rivaled the War Games, which is a freaking achievement in itself. But that is it, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone watching. That was my ranking of the Fourth Doctor era from worst to best, despite having quite a few stinkers, more than the previous era in my opinion. The top 3 are masterclass of television. If it wasn't for Tom Baker, I wouldn't be here. This channel probably wouldn't even exist in this manner. I know this video took a long time to actually happen. I hope the video conveys the message about how much I love and admire the era. Tom Baker and everyone alongside him brought so much joy to people, and it will always be in my memory Thank you, Tom.
I'm the doctor.
No, Doctor, I'm the Doctor, and I say that you're not fit.
You may be a doctor, but I'm the doctor.
Doctor, you're being childish.
Well, of course I am. There's no point in being grown up if you can't be childish sometimes.
Harry Sullivan is an imbecile!
Am I really?
Yes, Homo sapiens. One who knew the future pointed out a child to you and told you that that child would grow up totally evil. To be a ruthless dictator who would destroy millions of lives. Could you then kill that child? Do I have the right? I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity. Please excuse me. Could you be very kind and tell us where we are?
I wouldn't even say no to a salami sandwich.
The Sontarans are the finest soldiers in the galaxy.
Don't forget me.
Sarah, don't you forget me. You know, the very powerful and the very stupid have one thing in common. They don't alter their views to fit the facts. They alter the facts to fit the views. This lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead. What devil is that? Even the sonic screwdriver won't get me out of this one. Oh! I say, what a wonderful butler. He's so violent. You're a beautiful woman, probably.
It's the end. It's the end. It's the end. But the moment has been prepared.